Every foreclosure in America has a file number. Your family's was 00447-B. The bank stamped it, resolved with a 94% recovery rate, and moved to the next line item. Your father was 53 when his heart stopped. You were 16 when you learned that grief and policy can look identical from the outside, and only one of them is someone's fault. Your father built Mercer family hardware over 22 years with the specific kind of stubbornness that only works if the world plays fair. 3 employees became 40. 1 location became 4. The store on Callahan Avenue had your grandfather's name carved above the door in oak, and it smelled like sawdust and WD-40 and every Saturday morning of your childhood. He borrowed from Crestline National Bank to fund the 4th location during the expansion years, a handshake arrangement with a branch manager named Hollis, who wore cedar aftershave and called your father Ray like they were old friends. They were not old friends. Hollis was a commissioned instrument, and your father was a target who did not yet know he was being aimed at. When the market softened, Crestline did not call. They did not restructure. They triggered an acceleration clause buried in paragraph 19 of a 40-page agreement your father had signed without a lawyer because Hollis had described it as standard, and your father still believed that people who looked you in the eye meant what they said. In 6 weeks, they took the business, the inventory, the trucks, the storefront with the oak carving, and the family home your father had pledged as collateral during a meeting Hollis had specifically framed as a show of partnership. Your mother got a job at a pharmacy counting other people's pills. Your father got quieter, then smaller, then won. February morning, he simply did not get up, and the paramedics said cardiac event, and you were 16 years old, and you already knew the real word for it. You got a full scholarship to a state school for computer science because rage, properly directed, is indistinguishable from brilliance. First year, you learned Python, Java, and systems architecture. Second year, you learned that Crestline National was acquired by Veridian Financial Group 14 months after your family lost everything, and that Veridian had paid $400 million for an institution that had run the same acceleration play on 47 loans in 12 months, harvested the stripped assets, packaged them into a cleaned portfolio, and sold that portfolio to a private equity firm that flipped it for $900 million 18 months later. Your family was not collateral damage. Your family was the mechanism. By junior year, you have stopped attending parties and started attending to the architecture of how a major bank actually operates beneath the surface the public interacts with. Core banking infrastructure. SWIFT and ACH processing layers. The internal audit communication systems that most security teams classify as legacy and therefore deprioritize. The gaps that accumulate when nobody is watching because everyone assumes someone else already checked. You are not here to check. You are here to go through. Your entry point is a misconfigured API endpoint in Veridian's internal audit reporting layer, a connection between 2 systems built by different contractors in different years that was never properly authenticated because the security review occurred before one of the systems was fully deployed and nobody ever scheduled the follow-up. You find it in 11 days of passive reconnaissance using nothing that touches their network directly. You do not break in. You step through a door they left unlocked and forgot about entirely. Once inside, you do nothing for 3 weeks. You map. You trace the architecture, identify the monitoring thresholds, understand where the logging occurs and where it does not. Patience at this stage is not caution. It is the difference between a surgeon and someone who just owns a knife. What you find in week 4 changes the shape of everything you thought you were doing. The folder is named Project Meridian. It is dated, signed with corporate letterhead, and contains the complete internal record of the loan acceleration campaign, including the original targeting model, the performance metrics, the branch manager directive emails, and a legal opinion memo commissioned by Veridian's general counsel 8 months before the Crestline acquisition, confirming that the strategy was, quote, likely to generate regulatory scrutiny, but structured to remain outside criminal exposure, given current enforcement posture. They built it, documented it, ran it past their lawyers, received a green light, and executed. Your father's name is in the targeting database as account ref 00447-B. Status resolved. Recovery rate 94%. They celebrated 94%. The other 6% was your father. You sit with what you have found for 72 hours without sleeping. Not because you are deciding whether to act, but because you are deciding how to act correctly, which is a different problem entirely, and one that very few people who reach this moment ever think to separate. A leak is not enough. You have watched documented corporate crime labeled as fabrication within 48 hours of publication because the institutions being exposed have more algorithmic infrastructure than the people doing the exposing. You do not need to go louder. You need to go undeniable. You spend 3 weeks building what you will later think of as the architecture of credibility. You identify Carmen Reyes, 12 years as a federal bank examiner, 4 years building plaintiff-side financial fraud cases, 2 current cases in active discovery against major lenders. You spend 4 days verifying she is exactly who she appears to be before you trust anything to her orbit. Some people are exactly who they appear to be. It is rarer than it should be, and worth recognizing when it is true. You build a precision package, Hollis's directive emails, the legal opinion memo, the bonus performance dashboard, linking the acceleration outcomes to executive compensation. Full metadata intact, forensically clean, independently verifiable. You do not send everything. You send enough to prove the rest exists. You mail a physical encrypted drive to her office with a single handwritten note. The data is clean. I want nothing except for this to be provable. She calls 4 days later. Her voice is measured, a person who has learned not to react before verifying. She asks one question. Is the metadata clean? You tell her yes. She says she needs 3 weeks. You tell her, take whatever you need, because you are not going anywhere. During those 3 weeks, you discover something that transforms the entire undertaking from historical justice into something more urgent. Veridian is currently running a modified version of the same acceleration model targeting small medical practices that took on expansion debt during the pandemic. The methodology has been updated, new variable names, slightly adjusted trigger thresholds. But the structure is identical to Project Meridian, and the targeting logic is the same. It is not something they used to do. It is something they are doing right now, today, to people who have not yet received the phone call that your father received and do not yet know what it means. You extract the current portfolio data with the same methodical care and add it to your archive. The question is no longer only about your family. It is about the 211 families already processed and the new cohort being processed at this moment, while you sit in a studio apartment and their owners are probably working late, trying to make the numbers work. Carmen calls back on day 19. Files are clean. 3 of her current plaintiffs appear in your historical data, which reconstructs her existing cases entirely. The current portfolio, if it holds under verification, is a preliminary injunction before it is anything else. She asks who you are. You tell her your last name is Mercer. She is quiet for a moment that lasts long enough to mean something. Then she says she knows that name from the original Crestline recovery portfolio. She says she is sorry. You tell her you are not looking for sorry. You are looking for provable. It takes 7 months from that call to the federal filing. Carmen sends one encrypted message the night before. Tomorrow. You read it in the same studio apartment. The coffee is still cold. The complaint covers the historical campaign, the active medical portfolio, and names Douglas Vaith, 3 board members, and the private equity firm that profited from the original asset flip. 40 pages of forensic exhibits, every file clean, every chain of custody intact. Not a leak, not an allegation, not something an algorithm can label as synthetic. A federal court filing with exhibits attached, and federal court filings exist in a dimension that manipulation cannot easily reach. Veridian drops 11% in the first trading session. Their general counsel resigns before the market closes. The same general counsel who wrote the memo blessing, Project Meridian. By the second morning, 2 of the 8 other banks identified in industry benchmarking reports as having used similar methodologies issue preemptive statements announcing internal reviews. The story does not get buried because it cannot be buried. Carmen's filing is public record with forensic backing, and by the time any editorial decision could be made, 3 additional plaintiff firms have already accessed the public record and begun filing related suits. By month 3, there are congressional subpoenas. By month 6, 9-figure settlement negotiations have begun. By month 14, the settlement is signed, and it includes direct restitution to identified class members, an independently administered business rebuilding fund, and a decade of mandatory third-party auditing. 211 families are listed as class members. Your father is not alive to receive a check. Your mother is. She calls you when the settlement payment arrives, and she does not ask how you knew what you knew or how you found what you found. She tells you your father would have been proud of you. You tell her you just did the math, because that is the complete truth. Someone had to be angry enough and patient enough and precise enough to sit inside a system that classified your father as a recovery rate and refused to accept that the accounting was correct. Someone had to find the actual numbers, the real ones, the ones the institution kept internally, because they needed them for their own records, even as they buried them from everyone else. The bank did not fall. Banks absorb. Banks restructure and rename and issue statements and continue. But 211 families received restitution for something they were told was simply how the world works, and Douglas Veith is currently the subject of a federal investigation that will occupy the remainder of his professional life. And the oak carving above the door on Callahan Avenue is gone, but the name it carried is in a federal complaint that will be a matter of public record for as long as records are kept. Account Ref 00447-B. Status resolved. Recovery rate 94%. Wrong on every count. And now, the record shows it.